Thank you. I'm going to call the October meeting of the Board of Regents to order. Before I get started with the meeting, which, by the way, folks, we have a short agenda today. I want to make a couple of comments regarding members of this body. As you all probably know, our chair, Ken Powell, was in an accident on maybe Monday or Tuesday, maybe Monday of this week. I talked to him last night on the phone. He went home yesterday. The doctor said, get out of the hospital. They're still doing some tests. He still has a long ways to recover, but he is home. He is doing well, and he wanted to make sure I thank each and every one of you, his colleagues, for their concern, for your texts and for your calls and for your prayers. He wanted to make sure that you got noted for that, and he was very, very, very appreciative. But he's doing well, and unfortunately, because he was in the accident, you have me here today with the gavel. I should also recognize that one other of our colleagues, Regent Her, will not be here and will not take part of us because she is actually out of the country at this time and was not even able to phone in. So let's get started with the first item of business. The approval of the September minutes. Motion to approve? So moved. Second? Okay, there's been a motion and a second to approve the September minutes. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor of approving the September minutes, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. The motion is approved. The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Not available.
He tells me that's not in the script. Okay, so I think next on the agenda, we'll turn to our wonderful president, President Gable, for any comments she might have and a report from the president.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I add our best wishes from the administration to Chair Powell and our hope for a speedy recovery. I'm pleased to make my report to all of you today. Earlier this week, I passed my 100th day serving as your president, and I did not send out a 100-day report because I wanted to make it here with you. Just a couple of days later, claiming a little executive privilege with that. It's a day we've marked across leadership transitions dating from what we could find back to Franklin Roosevelt. And we would like to consider this report the 100-day report if we could. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the University of Minnesota family for the important work we've either launched or some of which we've accomplished over the first 100 days, and thank everyone in advance for the work that we intend to achieve in the days ahead. I also want to thank everybody once again for the warm Minnesota welcome that you've extended to me and my family. It has been lovely. We are very happy to be here personally and professionally. So as all of you know, on September 20th, I was inaugurated as president after a week of activities which blended long-held university traditions with new approaches that emphasized accessibility, inclusivity, innovation, discovery, and fiscal stewardship. I was very proud to live stream the installation ceremony from the McNamara Alumni Center and this room in which we sit, and the inaugural steps and the inaugural address from the iconic steps at Northrop Memorial Auditorium, making the events available in real time for our entire university community across the entire state. Visits to Morris and Duluth followed, spotlighting the university's work to advance impact across Minnesota and beyond, and I look forward to upcoming visits to Rochester and Crookston in the coming weeks. My grateful thanks to the University of Minnesota Foundation, the Planning Committee, and everyone involved in hosting inaugural events, as those who participated in inaugural visits and activities either in person or via the live stream. Our system-wide strategic planning continues, and you'll hear an update about that in detail in just a few minutes later in the meeting. Work also continues on our two senior level searches, the Executive Vice President and Provost and the Vice President for Human Resources. In particular, the Provost search has already completed public interviews with a wide range of faculty, staff, and student stakeholders, including a public forum that was recorded and posted on the search website for anyone who could not attend in person. I sent an email on Wednesday with links to all of those public forums for anybody who didn't have a chance to watch it in person. For these positions, I'm seeking individuals who are academic and strategic collaborators and doers who are focused on cultivating academic and operational excellence and a commitment to fostering equitable and inclusive environments across our system. We're still accepting evaluations from the community through the end of the day, at which point I'll review those evaluations and consult with my team and the search committee on next steps through the offer phase. Next week, we'll be bringing 4 candidates to campus for the public interview phase for our VP of HR search. Similar to the provost search, this will include a wide range of faculty, staff, and student stakeholder consultation and input, and will include public forums that will be recorded and posted on the search website. I believe you've received an email with the dates for those public forums. The identities of the finalists will be announced approximately 24 hours before they come for their public forum presentation. I strongly encourage our university community to participate in the public interview process and provide feedback through the evaluation forms. Your perspectives are extremely important to me. I hope to be in a position to bring these 2 appointments to you for approval at the December board meeting. I would like to thank everyone who served or is serving on a search committee, who participated in listening sessions at the start of each process, and who committed to engage with the candidates during the public interviews. Your contributions to these search processes are critical to our success. On July 22nd, I directed our Office of General Counsel to conduct a review of policies and procedures related to public access of university information, including but not limited to a review of current process, best practices, and training and data collection, as well as to recommend improvements if warranted. The OGC's October 1st report offers a thoughtful and thorough analysis about the university's approach to honoring the Minnesota government's Data Practices Act in the face of more and more complicated requests for information. I will be speaking with university leadership in the coming weeks about how we can be more efficient in this work, as well as how to approach implementation of the report's recommendations. I'm confident this review and the actions that result will help us to improve, while also further strengthening practices that are already working well in line with our overall commitment to transparency and accountability. And I will report back as this work progresses. Lastly, last month, I noted that we were taking inventory of all of our systems work around outreach, which was an important charge of the board coming out of the retreat in July and a goal for the board for this year. By definition, the word outreach implies unidirectionality, whereas another word that we often use synonymously, engagement, is actually multidirectional, more inclusive, and encourages the principle of working with others as opposed to working on them. Therefore, I believe the term engagement best represents the charge of the board. And to this end, the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus and the Morris campus has earned the Carnegie Foundation designation for the Advancement of Teaching's prestigious Community Engagement Classification. This classification is not an award, but rather utilizes evidence-based documentation through a process of self-assessment and quality improvement. And the Twin Cities campus was one of the first few public research universities in the nation to earn the community engagement classification during the initial application in 2016 and was renewed in 2015. I bring this up because the Carnegie Foundation's definition of community engagement, which is widely accepted as a national best practice, provides a strong foundation in our work to define the university's outreach and engagement activities. Carnegie defines community engagement as the collaboration between institutions of higher education and their larger communities, local, regional, state, national, global, for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in a context of partnership and reciprocity. We intend to refine this definition with the University of Minnesota's unique qualities, including our distinction as a land-grant institution steeped in discovery and committed to impact in our state. And I've charged Matt Kramer, our Vice President for University Relations, to develop a plan to help us coalesce and quantify the university's outreach and engagement efforts, including the development of an interactive website which will highlight these efforts across every county in the state. And I look forward to updating you on this progress also at the December meeting. So in closing, it's been a very exciting and rewarding 103 days, and I look forward to briefing you later in this meeting about our progress specifically towards our system-wide strategic planning. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, President Gable. And I think from the chair's report, I'll start with the inauguration. The week was wonderful. I had a chance to take part, and I know others of you did, in a couple of events. It went very, very well, and President Gable, we are honored that you bring your energy and your talents to Minnesota. And thank you very much for a wonderful week. Very quickly in the chair's report, I'll just refer to yesterday, and as part of our luncheon engagement, we had the opportunity to go over to CFANS, and Dean Brian Burr took us through the St. Paul campus. We did get to see the bee lab. Nobody got stung. I think I found out that actually honeybees don't sting, right? It's the wasps that you probably get. And we also got to hear a presentation on plant protein enhancements, which would take the place of my hamburger. But we did get a very good briefing on that. Secondly, I'd like to say Regent Sue and I had the chance to attend the Alumni Award banquet on last week, Tuesday night or Wednesday night. Lisa, if any of these regents here ever want to be inspired, if anybody in this entire university want to be inspired, come to the Alumni Awards banquet. It is awesome. When you see the persons that have brought forward the mentorship, the jobs, the development, the serving the university on many committees and advice. It was a wonderful evening, and Lisa, thank you very, very much for that. And also last night, as regents, we had a chance to share an evening at your residence or new residence to be with our FCC committee. And it was wonderful to be with them to talk about the shared governance. And I am also going to tell you that I am wrong many, many times. Just previously in our first meeting right before this, I mentioned that we could do things quicker and not go through all committees. President Gable told me and educated me that that's the way we go through shared governance. And because of that, I think the process is much more acceptable to me than it was 20 minutes ago, after you explained that to me, and because I really believe in the shared governance idea. So with that, that'll be the report of the chair for today, with Chairman Ken actually gone. Looking forward to our agenda here. Items on this agenda specifically relate, some of them, to our year's priorities that we set down in Faribault at our retreat in July. Let me just mention a couple of them from the Mission Fulfillment Committee yesterday. We heard about the CIS College and Schools, PSEO strategy, how both programs basically not only have had impressive outcomes, but how they help our students and help the university itself, and all the way from obtaining college credit to maybe addressing some of the debt challenges that they might have. And in the FIN Committee, Finance and Operations Committee, we heard a discussion of the variables that will take place as we develop the 2021 budget. At that point, I want to compliment former chairs Beeson, McMillan, and now Chair Powell. And personally, I feel much more involved now in the discussion and development of the budget and the triggers and the intersections of investment than I did 6 years ago when I was here. And that's a compliment to the former chairs, that I think we're getting much more involved in the information, the push and pull between that takes place between affordability, between excellence, and controlling the costs. With that, let's move on. Next item is the receive and file items, and of which there are none this month. There are. Regent Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment. I'm not sure where it fits in here, but did want to recognize that last week Regent Shu and I presented the Regents Award to a very deserving couple, Bob and Sally Sands, who have supported students through generous donations. So just wanted to make sure we acknowledge that family and their receiving of a very deserving award.
Regent Sue, and you did that? He's all over. He's all over. I can't go anyplace here in the university without Regent Sue being there. That's a compliment, Regent Sue. You don't have to.
When you're everywhere, you don't have to be anywhere.
Very good. Well, thank you, Regent Kenya, for adding that. Let's see, with no receive and file items, let's move ahead to the consent report. Is there a motion to approve the consent report?
So moved.
Second? There's been a motion and a second to approve the consent report. Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the consent report, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say nay. The motion is approved. Next on the agenda, we'll move ahead to the system-wide strategic plan. President Gable, I think will be on your shoulders. Provide us an update on the next steps for the university's system-wide plan, and specifically the system commitments the president intends to make to that plan. President Gable?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Last month, I presented to you a timeline aimed at delivering a new University of Minnesota system-wide strategic plan for formal review in May. I note how the plan builds upon earlier phases, particularly Phase 1, led by co-chairs, Vice Provost Rebecca Ropers, and then Chancellor Stephen Lemkuhl, which was noteworthy for its high degree of consultation with stakeholders across the system. Phase 2 established one-year system-wide strategic priorities within the context of the presidential transition, and the timeline that you see beginning this fall represents Phase 3, which I'm very fortunate was not at a standing start. To build upon and refresh Phases 1 and 2, we have consulted widely over recent months with university leaders, faculty, staff, student supporters, partners, government, and other elected officials. In these conversations, we found consistency around our systemness as it was articulated in the previous work, and now we lean into our collective strengths and impact. The collective consistency at the system level represents the intersection of our values and action, which we are calling commitments, and they will be aligned to specific, measurable, and action-oriented goals. On September 17th, I sent a system-wide email with an invitation for feedback on the plan and the strategic commitments through an online form that's on my presidential homepage. I followed up with a similar system-wide message earlier this week. I've shared this opportunity widely, particularly during strategic planning discussions around our system, including recent inaugural visits and resulting town halls on the Duluth and Morris campuses, during the annual Extension Conference in Duluth, and at Homecoming on the Twin Cities campus with alumni leaders, amongst others. In addition to the former, I sent a message to our broad community of University of Minnesota alumni to share their feedback about the commitments. I sent similar messaging to our state's government and elected officials, including our 201 state legislators, the governor and lieutenant governor, our congressional delegation, and mayors and city council members in Crookston, Duluth, Falcon Heights, Minneapolis, Morris, Rochester, and St. Paul, amongst others. And I have started to seek feedback from our business community, including through my membership in the Minnesota Business Partnership, and I look forward to engaging business leaders and community partners in the coming weeks. I personally want to thank our university community for your voice during this process, which has been invaluable in helping us frame the system-wide strategic commitments. And at this time, I'd like to share with you our draft strategic commitments, which are defined by the feedback we've received to date. So these may evolve since we have not been to every campus and are still seeking input. So these commitments are offered in the spirit of service and outreach, integrity and impact, access and excellence. The University of Minnesota as a system commits to student success, which you've heard me mention before, but we are articulating as meeting all students where they are and maximizing their skills, potential, and well-being in a rapidly changing world. We commit to discovery, innovation, and impact, which articulates as channeling curiosity and investing in discovery to cultivate possibility, innovate solutions, and elevate Minnesota and society as a whole. I'm going to come back to the third one. The fourth is our commitment to community and belonging, which we articulate as fostering a welcoming community that values belonging, equity, diversity, and dignity in people and ideas. And we commit to fiscal stewardship, which is stewarding resources that promote access, efficiency, transparency, and collaboration through meaningful partnerships with the state, students, family, and partners. I'll come back to the third. When we had this as a bullet point during my last presentation, we talked about finding things that refer to unique questions, opportunities, challenges that are presented by the wonderful diversity of our state where we also have depth and capacity across our faculty, students, et cetera, across the system, and looking at how those challenges and questions, strength and depth intersect to both impact the state and then impact the world. We have framed this as mintersections, the intersection between these unique questions and challenges, our unique strengths and capacity that serve our state and impact the world, which are focused over the course of this strategic plan, keeping in mind that strategic plans are for a duration and evolve, but we foresee over the next several years focusing on health, food, and the environment. And we articulate this as improving the health of people and places at the intersection of our system's strengths and opportunities inspired by Minnesota and impacting the world. I look forward to future briefings and input from faculty consultative committees, such as the Faculty Consultative Committee and Senate Research Committee, among others, student consultative committees, such as the Student Consultative Committee, amongst others, and representatives from all of our employee groups. We are still in inaugural activities, which include my visit to Rochester on October 24th and Crookston from November 6th to the 7th to consult about the commitments in the overall strategic plan. And in addition, we will hold similar feedback sessions on the Twin Cities campus in the coming weeks. Our goal is to formally present the commitments to you at the December meeting after hearing your feedback today and any additional feedback you provide in the interim and after those consultative visits in this ensuing period. After articulating the system commitments, we will turn to what it will take to fulfill them, again, based on additional feedback and consultation. As I noted earlier, what we're calling our Impact 2025 plan will be clear, specific, and measurable with distinct goals and action items. It will provide a guidepost for what kind of institution we want to be, as we discussed during our retreat. On the other hand, it's unlikely to be a detailed playbook that provides an answer to every potential question, but should provide guideposts so that we can have robust discussions about questions as they arise. I will be charging senior leaders into working groups to establish goals, action items, and tactics that are specific, measurable, and distinctive to align with the commitments along the timeline that you see here. Senior leaders will present these goals and objectives to the board over the course of spring 2020. Moreover, units across our university community who already have strategic plans in place or have already begun preparing their strategic plan will describe how their work to date aligns with the commitments. And for those with plans in place, the next step in the planning process will consist of an overlay or an executive summary, if you will, that highlights the connectedness to the commitments. I will provide system-wide strategic planning updates on these steps to you at board meetings in December, February, and March. And ultimately, we intend to present the system-wide strategic plan for your review and discussion at the May 2020 board meeting with board action on the plan during the June 2020 board meeting. While the timing isn't perfect, this process and the ongoing consultation should help guide budget decisions, particularly since this is a transitional budget this year and certainly should next year. And lastly, following this plan and as a next step, we will initiate a process to review and refresh our maroon and gold measures, likely at the Board of Regents retreat in July. So with that, I thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, President Gable. I specifically enjoyed hearing the words commitment, measurable, and distinctive. And you highlighted those. I think you mentioned both of them 2 or 3 times. And those are words that are certainly warm to my ears. So thank you for your plan, and I'll turn to members, colleagues here on the Board of Regents to enter into a discussion, if you'd like, with the President. Any questions, comments? Regent Rocha first.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I'll start it off. This is fantastic, and I was so pleased to see your very thoughtful engagement with people in the community. The community is where we have a significant physical presence as well as across the entire state. I think that's very important. It's very smart, and building it off of the expertise and the in the shared governance model with the folks that make the university what the university is. I think it's totally remarkable, and I'm very happy about that. As we go forward and as we start to get some more definition of the variety that the chair just mentioned, there will be a point where I think we will want to re-engage with very specific people, particularly on the front of those that make decisions about state finances. to ensure that they're bought into this measurable and distinct mission that we play in the state. So congratulations on yet another very impressive and inspiring presentation on this, and I look forward to that continuing process.
Thank you.
Other members? Questions of President Gable? It's a good chance right now. Oh, Regent Sue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, President Gable. I think this is a good update, but I want to talk about something that I had heard, and I've talked to you about it already, but I want to share this with the rest of the board. And I was a little bit troubled when I talked to somebody about the previous iterations of this process, and it involved online learning. And I think obviously online learning is important, but I was told by this person that one reason we didn't have this come up as more of a priority in former versions of our strategic planning is that we didn't want to take it away from Crookston. And because Crookston has been known for being first it was, I think, known as the notebook campus, but that's a little bit old school now. But back in the 90s, they had pioneered kind of one approach to online learning. And I think the fact that I was shocked when I heard that, because I look at that as being kind of a little bit myopic in terms of what we should be doing as a system, and to leave that at Crookston and say, well, without that, Crookston doesn't have anything that would make it distinctive. And I don't think that's true, first of all. But I think it's troubling in that through the consultative approach that we would end up in such a place where we would say, well, yeah, we're just going to leave the online learning in Crookston and that's it. So I caution you again on kind of where that kind of is headed and where that kind of thinking is headed when we look at this. Obviously, whenever we open up a strategic planning process for an entity as large as the university, you have a lot of people, running to protect what they think is important to them and not wanting to share it with the rest of the system. But we are the University of Minnesota, and I think we need to look at all of the great things that we're doing and try to do better with what we have and resources that we have. And the reason that's important to me in terms of the online learning part of it is, as we did famously get rid of the School of General College, but I think online learning has a place in replacing what we lost with the General College. And I've received some emails to that effect, and I totally agree that there's an opportunity to reach the rest of the state that we're not reaching now, because physically we can only reach them at our campuses. And, and obviously we have outreach activities and research sites and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's important to think about using online learning as kind of a way to reach the rest of the population. And in doing so, I think we have a better story to tell legislators, because as we know, our competition and our sister system is in more places than we are, and they have more legislators that are going to be pressured to send money back to their parts of the state. So I think with online learning, that's kind of our way of being able to address that particular issue. So thank you very much.
Yes, I'll turn to President Gable. I'm first going to say, President Gable, that there was a former Speaker of the House in 2002 that mentioned to President Brunick that we could not be everything to everybody, and maybe letting the rest of the system take the place of General College might be a reasonable, wise thing to do. So, President Gable.
I wonder who that was. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Regent Hsu. As you know, we've been talking about this really for quite some time now. The conversation to which Regent Hsu refers, just for clarification for everyone else, was not with me about where or how we might do online learning. I see a discussion of online learning certainly coming up. It could come up across a couple of the commitments as we start to look at goals and action items. I would be surprised if it didn't. Where or how to be determined. But online learning, along with a variety of other things, is likely to emerge. That's the next phase of what we intend to do around goals and then the action items that would go underneath in order to accomplish those goals. And I look forward to those discussions.
Thank you.
Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Swigum and President Gable. I'd like to just reinforce a couple points that my takeaways from this. First, thank you for the swift and collaborative timeline, at least from this point on. I think that can be especially impactful for your next 100 to 200 days.
It might be, yes.
I applaud looking at the critical few, those 5 categories, and encourage not to get too many goals holding those up so that we really see that impact that you're looking for. And I'm assuming that budget and resources follow those priorities. And then one other comment is I like the idea of the campuses aligning their work today with the overarching goals. I think that's important rather than a whole nother layer of goals and responsibilities. So I think a lot of the work that we'll see come out is reflected on the campuses, and that way we strengthen those initiatives rather than add to them. Thank you.
Okay. President Gable, do you need a response?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion? Any further questions or discussion for the President? If not, President Gable, I think you hear from the board here, and with the body language and the head shaking, a very positive reaction to your plan, to your commitments, to your time frame, and I think just go ahead with good speed.
Thank you.
Okay, next I'll call to the table VP Kramer. At our July retreat in Faribault, there were some discussions that were made regarding research and incentivizing research. A lot of focus on that. Now I'd like to invite Vice President Kramer to join us for the first of 3 robust discussions to the university's research strategy. One of the board's 5 priorities for the year is to develop strategies to grow our impact as a top 10 research institution, including incentivizing and promoting the impact of research that addresses opportunities and challenges facing our Minnesota and our great state. And it was part of our discussion at our retreat in July. Vice President Kramer, welcome to the table. And let's turn it over to you at this point.
Chair Swigum, thank you. I think President Gable might have indicated she had some framing remarks.
I'll waive.
All right. Well,
They're not on my agenda here this year.
I see. We'll be guided by that. I'm tremendously excited to be here to start this conversation with you, and to follow that outline of the strategic plan process is particularly apt, as I'm going to align with that in ways that I hope will foster good discussion. So, it's always fun to be the last speaker in a symposium speaking as an academic, because you get to kind of engage with everything you've heard throughout the symposium and tie it in. So, Regent Hsu, you mentioned that you thought perhaps as an institution we failed to articulate our values frequently enough and fall back upon them. So I want to emphasize that every time I give a presentation as the Vice President for Research, I talk about my unit's values as the first slide. And so here they are: partnership, discovery, and integrity. And I won't dwell on them because I hope you're going to see them reflected in the rest of the presentation. But I do think it's extraordinarily important to have those to look at and think about every time people in my office make a decision. And we certainly hope they align and will ensure they align with the institutional values. So in your docket, there's a big black box. I wanted to start, it's Nobel Prize week, you may have noticed. And it turns out I'm a very early riser, and nevertheless, once again on Wednesday, I failed to get a phone call from Stockholm. Again. those chemistry winners were very worthy. People have been waiting for lithium-ion batteries forever. Oldest Nobelist, John Goodenough. Okay, sorry, I'm geeking out on chemistry. But I wanted to let you hear from a Nobel laureate, actually, and in particular, a Nobel laureate in physics who now serves as the vice chancellor for Australian National University. And that's the equivalent of a president, a vice chancellor within a UK-like system. So let's just go right there.
Yeah, so this comes down to a problem that almost every single politician I've ever met faces. They don't get how blue sky research translates eventually into economic benefits. The problem is, without blue sky research, you only invent what you already know. And the big gains are the revolutions. And if you're going to invent something you already know, that's what industry is really good at. So we really need to have government focusing on doing the stuff that industry doesn't do well, blue sky research, the first stages of translation, and then work on our industry policy where we can actually get industry and academia working together, which is a place where Australia performs phenomenally poorly on the world stage.
All right, and so, of course, when Vice Chancellor Schmidt talked about government, what he was talking about was government support for higher education and for the research that takes place within institutions of higher education, in Australia in this case. But I think those words resonate in all places where we have high-performing higher education institutions. And so the first thing I want to talk about in terms of how we incentivize research is how committed we should be and how important it is that we incentivize the sort of blue sky research that was talked about here, basic research. And that's actually what you heard yesterday. Again, it's really fun to be at the end. You heard yesterday about what attracts and retains the highest performing faculty around the world. It's the opportunity to be working at that forefront of the unknown, the really basic research from which revolutionary as opposed to evolutionary discoveries can be made. And so let me tell you a bit about some of the resources we deploy in order to foster good research. And I should emphasize, I think up front, we do $1 billion in research expenditures, and we incentivize, at least my office, so that's a $1 billion battleship, and I have about a $6 million oar. So I'm all for row the boat, but really, remember, it's the innovative thinking and the creative thinking of the faculty across the institution that really gives rise to the dollars that come in. Nevertheless, we try to help those faculty with things that come out of my office. We call it research advancement, and it is a series of seed funding mechanisms. They vary a bit in scope, so grant and aid is typically a relatively small investment, maybe $25,000 to $50,000, and there are faculty panels that look at proposals on a semi-annual basis, and we divide those into sort of social sciences, humanities, and the arts in one iteration, and the other is more technology and sciences, for example. The idea being that these seed funds will help researchers make initial advances, garner some initial results that will then make them more competitive when they go out to external sources and seek their support. Minnesota Futures is another program in my office that's similar in its character, but larger in scope. So that's about a $250,000 grant for a couple of years, typically, awarded to faculty who have not worked together before and who represent pretty different areas. So it's an attempt to foster new interdisciplinary research. You've probably heard quite a bit about how it's at the frontiers of traditional fields that there are often opportunities to make significant advances. We invest in research infrastructure. I'll say more about infrastructure a little later. Certain external agencies often require the university to match their funding in order to make an award, and we have some funds reserved for that. I have an informatics institute as part of my research computing operation that assists faculty who have needs in that area. And finally, some funds we just dedicate to campuses other than the Twin Cities. So FEF is faculty research enhancement funds, and those are delivered to Crookston, Morris, and Rochester to use as they see fit with their internal processes. And the feedback I've heard on the use of those funds, and we get a report, has been that they're extraordinarily useful and they've been taken full advantage of. So that's just my office, mind you. There are many incentivization mechanisms across the system. I'll mention specifically in the health sciences, because that is such a large portion of our operation, that the Office of Academic Clinical Affairs, which includes our Clinical Translational Science Institute, as well as the Masonic Cancer Center, they also have a number of funds that are dedicated typically to seeding. And I'll really emphasize the seeding aspect. When I came in, I adopted the Kramer doctrine, which made certain colleagues unhappy. But I basically tell you, you'll never get money from me for more than 3 years. Because if I give you money for more than 3 years, I won't have any money to give to the people who come along in 4 years. So do something with it. Good luck, but it's going to be cut off. And I think that's a philosophy that tends to inform most of the work we do in seeding. The idea is, give it a chance to grow. If it works, great. If not, move on to the next thing that has a chance to grow. And I won't run through every single bullet on here, but you can see one aspect of our healthcare seeding, if you will, is that a lot of it focuses a little more on the translational side. So I did emphasize the basic research component, but we do recognize how important it is to successfully translate the research closer and closer to the market. And indeed, later on, I'll get to some of our technology commercialization operations. And finally, the Office of the Executive Vice President and Provost, you've heard quite a bit, I think, about the Grand Challenges initiative that emerged out of the Twin Cities strategic plan. So that included funding for Grand Challenge research efforts and, importantly, fed into curriculum as well. And I'll say more about curriculum later, too. And finally, multicultural research awards that come out of the Office of Equity and Diversity. We're actually partnering with them starting this spring. We're going to take some of our grant and aid funds and pool them with OED funds to do a little more in this space because we think it's important and it aligns with some of the goals of this board. So I'm starting at a high level and I'm going to try to keep focusing down a little bit because incentivization often, you're interested in specific topics. But certain topics, if you will, in order to be successful at the institution, require some kind of infrastructure. Infrastructure that is above and beyond what any individual research group could amass the resources for. I've listed several of them here, and indeed, last board meeting, you see one that you visited, the University of Minnesota Genomics Center. And these are core facilities that do require institutional investment. None of them are capable of fully covering their costs through, say, an internal service operation model or an external service model. They're not bad. A good target to shoot for is about 85%. That's true nationwide. Some do better than that. Few do better than that. Some do worse than that. And then there's some additional institutional subsidy. But they provide this service that multiple faculty research groups can use and advance their own research thereby. We also, of course, have the research and outreach centers that are across the state that foster a lot of our agricultural research. And finally, a really critical infrastructure. So that third value that I showed you at the very beginning was integrity. It is my office that has some of the compliance functions in it designed to ensure that all our research is carried out with integrity and a commitment to ethics. And you see some of the individual components there. And again, I won't read every bullet for you. Drilling down a little further now, I want to sort of address some topics, if you will. So what are the topics of most interest and how do they emerge? And importantly, of course, you're getting a lot of fricatives in the microphone there. I'll do it the right way and not pop into the microphone. Importantly, faculty are the ones who typically identify these and tend to begin to aggregate together to address emerging topics, and often then are able to make some compelling case to administrators that this topic is so compelling, there are resources available, the federal government has decided it's interested in investing in, that some sort of a convening and managerial structure should be created around it. We often call that a center or an institute or a consortium. So I've listed a few on here, and they tend to be transdisciplinary. Otherwise, they could just exist within their units, which might be departments or colleges or schools. And so you see some interesting ones on here. I've highlighted in yellow just to say a word about it, the Center for Transportation Studies. So I picked that one because it has special interest to the state. It receives some funding from the Department of Transportation. So that's one reason, of course, to put it together. It covers policy, it covers technology, it's social science of how do you get people not to look at their phones while they're driving. And you see a snowplow there, so if you have not caught up at some stage or heard me tell a story about what the Center for Transportation Studies has done in order to make roads safer for snowplow drivers, and it cheaper for communities to actually do the snow removal that's required. It's a wonderful story, and there's a video that just will make you cry on their website. But this is an area where we're very engaged with the state and with the federal government. Other transdisciplinary centers emerge because there are specific partnerships with key university stakeholders. So you see here the Hormel Institute is the one I've chosen to highlight in yellow. I am wearing their tie, so it's a wonderful tie. It does have a left-handed helix on it as opposed to a right-handed helix for the DNA. So if anyone from the Institute is watching online, you might want to update that. But in any case, that institute, which is in Austin, Minnesota, and we just had, I just had the pleasure actually of welcoming the House Ag Committee and Higher Ed Committee were in southern Minnesota, and they chose to visit and tour, and Regent Davenport was there as well. And it was a delight to be able to show them that institute, which is focused on cancer prevention research. It is funded, a large portion of it, from one of our best philanthropic partners, the Hormel Foundation. And so they have a significant interest in advancing the research that's taking place there, and we can then partner and build on their largesse to make significant progress in this area. And the last one I'll call out, we could go on with all these bullets because there are we do a lot of things at the university, and there are some wonderful centers. I know the Institute of Child Development, of course, was discussed a little earlier because of its position in the bonding proposal, and it was just toured actually by the leadership of the Senate Higher Ed Committee, and I had a chance to tell them the values when I made a little presentation to them at lunch. But I'm going to call out the Large Lakes Observatory. Not only because that picture in the middle is Regent McMillan. It's hard to tell because it was like 20 below that day. and I'm there in the blue cap on your right as you look at the picture. But in any case, the Blue Heron is this really unique research facility. It is a research vessel. It is a former Atlantic fishing vessel from the 80s that has been retrofitted with support from the National Science Foundation. Largest research vessel on the Great Lakes that's owned by an academic institution. And it does fascinating research on that ecosystem, if you will. It's available. Ship time is something that my office will award grants for if you need to buy some ship time. Duluth also puts funds in for that. And it's a truly unique resource that I think lets us do things that truly impact Minnesota. As we drill into other areas we might consider when it comes to incentivization, I really must talk about something we did 5 years ago that I think has been one of our most successful initiatives when it comes to fostering research in particular areas. So Minnesota's Discovery Research and Innovation Economy, MinDrive, was an initiative and a proposal to the state 5 years ago that additional investment above and beyond the usual higher education budget be placed into particular topic areas where, A, we were already very strong as an institution, B, there was a really clear tie to economic importance for the state of Minnesota, and C, we really felt that investment would let us move things to a higher level that we could really articulate the impact of and show. And so the original 4 areas that were funded by the state, which was excited about that, for $18 million a year recurring, were robotics, sensors, and advanced manufacturing, global food ventures, advancing industry conserving our environment, and although it was originally called neuromodulation, nobody actually knew what that meant. So then it became called BRAIN for short, but now it has a better title, Discoveries and Treatments for Brain Conditions. And then most recently, this was expanded to include the Minnesota Cancer Clinical Trials Network within the last couple of years, and now it's a $22 million annual state investment. So you see some of the metrics. We report to the state annually on this, and we track these dollars very carefully. A lot of engagement with our own researchers, a lot of outreach to members of the community, especially the K-12 community, to really get people excited about this and bring them to the institution, hopefully, and particularly diverse populations in the schools. The one I might call out, I suppose, is the $360 million in external funding leverage based on $97 million so far. Actually, I think 4-to-1 return on investment is not bad, but I would emphasize it's actually higher than that because it took the first 2 years, of course, before we really generated the results that allowed us to go out and seek additional external funding. So I'm quite confident that number is going to go up. So I'm wearing my Academy of Distinguished Teachers pin because it would be remiss of me not to flog you with research is teaching and the hashtag research is teaching UMN, because it's a message I try to send every time I speak also. And students are something we try to incentivize into research. So I just want to remind you that we incentivize students to participate through the undergraduate research opportunities program that pays them to be in labs in the field, wherever the research takes place, on a stage, creative activities. Research experience for undergraduates, those are typically federally funded summer opportunities that bring in undergrads from the rest of the nation usually, and it's a great graduate recruiting opportunity, so departments love to have those. Interdisciplinary fellowships that the grad school uses in order to foster interdisciplinary research for graduate students. Some majors require it. And then finally, Grand Challenges courses, I mentioned, have grown out of our Grand Challenge Research Initiative as curriculum has been developed from it. So research is teaching. I thought I'd just show one that I think some of you have seen, the Gemini Huntley Robotics Lab. That came from a MnDrive investment that leveraged additional private donations, $10 million in donations on top of the $2 million MnDrive investment, to create a sort of state-of-the-art robotics lab. It's used by the researchers. It's also used in many of the laboratory courses now in that area. It's a student space where they can experiment. I think it's a great example of how the teaching and the research converge. Okay, so this slide is labeled draft. And it's labeled draft. It probably should even be a larger font because as Regent Sviggum pointed out a little bit earlier today, although he then backtracked a little bit, sometimes the academy can be a little slow getting started. And so it's, you can't consult on that until you've consulted on this, and then you form a committee that recommends that another committee be formed in order to, make sure no one feels ignored. But I'm going to throw out these ideas because you've got to start somewhere. And I'm really interested in hearing the board discussion on what you think of them. And then we will take them back as we work on our portion of the strategic plan and commitments. And so here are some of the suggestions that I would make as strategic directions, looking forward 5 years. And so there's a fair amount of narrative in your docket, and I won't attempt to repeat all of it, but I'll summarize it. So I would argue that we should try to grow our sponsored awards 5% per year, and as a stretch goal, 7%. So those really are, that's the billion roughly in spending I talked about. The awards a little less because we spend some of our own money. But growing those sponsored awards, they're the ones that are paying for the basic research. That's what's growing the reputation of departments, what's attracting the best researchers. Historically, over about the last 10 years, our growth rate's been 3.5%. So I think 5 is good as a next step, and 7 is a stretch goal, because actually for the last 2 years, we've achieved 7. So it's dangerous to, always make the last achievement your next goal. It's not obvious it'll be that easy, but that's where I would throw out as something to start. Because it's so important that we engage with industrial partners as they become increasingly critical to funding research in general, as well as to the economic development of the state, we should pay special attention just to those awards instead of target of 6% per year. And I've got yellow font in the next line on the slide, primarily because that's somewhere between sort of a goal and a tactic, if you will. So one of the ways that you grow your awards, of course, is to get lots more of them. But what gets you more reputational impact to some extent is to get the really big ones. And the really big ones often are very complicated. It requires some underlying infrastructure of staffing, for instance, just to put them together in a compelling way. And I mentioned to some of you, when there are new members of the board, but when I presented the annual report to the board last fall, that I had put together a unit called Spark. And Spark is specifically designed to sort of facilitate these kinds of big award preparations, getting faculty together across the system, across different campuses, across different areas. They actually have a Spark Collision event next week to have some conversations with some faculty interested in that. We've begun submitting some of these really big awards, and I'm hopeful that's going to continue to move on. It's really important also to engage with industry and national lab partners on those kinds of awards, and I think we have some exciting initiatives moving in that area. I would love to say that I picked the word systemness on this slide because I knew that President Gable would have it on a slide a little bit earlier, but it's actually a sheer coincidence, or else I'm just listening really carefully in our one-on-ones. And so I'm going to throw out here gross systemness of research expenditures by 50%. And there's an asterisk on that because metrics remain to be developed for how exactly do you measure systemness? And so, one grant that might be called a system grant would be you've got investigators from multiple campuses. I think that's a pretty easy one, for example. Another thing that might be called systemness would be simply that these are research efforts that focus on topics that have been defined to be of special importance to the system. Maybe it is, in fact, as listed in the yellow here, focus on the environment of Minnesota. And obviously that may have global impact, but it has special impact on Minnesota. On medical technology and care, and finally on food and agriculture. And again, I think you saw those in President Gable's presentation as well, although with slightly different wording perhaps. Grow impact of technology commercialization by 40%, and there's another asterisk on there for the best metrics to measure and then see about a 40% change. Impact is there in italics. I've chosen it because it's sort of a best practice in the literature in this area, but also came from an external advisory body that I had review our technology commercialization operation earlier this year. I am proud that we are one of the 13% of university tech transfer offices that's actually in the black. All the rest fail to cover their costs. And the reason for that is that we do really early stage research. So it's hard sometimes to build revenue. So a focus on revenue is important, and that may be one of the things that will be measured with a metric, obviously. But there are many other opportunities to have impact as well based on who's participating and how are we serving industry. I was at a wonderful event just after yesterday's meeting. Investors came and heard pitches from University of Minnesota startups. Neela Molgard, who is the newly appointed director of DEED's Launch Minnesota, was there. My executive director for technology commercialization, Rick Hipsch, is on the advisory board of that initiative of Governor Walz and Commissioner Grove. And I think that represents how the university is perceived as a real powerhouse already in the area of startups and innovation, and the state is hoping to be able to leverage some of our successes and learn from them and grow them externally, and we're very happy to try to partner on that. And then finally, and here's one that turned to Department Chair White when I mentioned it earlier this week, engage every undergraduate in a research experience. So let me say that we already offer the opportunity to every undergraduate to have a research experience, and we message that well, but we don't necessarily require it. Few exceptions. Rochester requires it. So I was down for Rochester's research presentation earlier this year, and that is an energizing event. If you get a chance to go, I strongly recommend it to you. Poster session, all these excited undergrads, many have been working in Mayo Clinic labs all around the state, maybe all around the nation. And it's part of their brand, and it's an important part of their brand. And when I was a director of undergraduate studies for the chemistry department, and parents would say to me, why should I send my child to the University of Minnesota? I've got, XYZ other choices. And my best answer was always, because we're going to give them the opportunity to do the research they might not be able to do at other places. They're going to have access to our cutting edge technologies. They're going to have access to the best faculty. Well, maybe we ought to make that an expectation. It'd be an interesting selling point. I emphasize, by the way, I'm throwing these out for discussion, so don't take anything too strongly. We have to define what is a research experience. Some departments have enough majors that putting them all into a faculty lab might pose traffic jam problems, but I think it would be an interesting thing to think about how we might go about accomplishing. So with that, I am eager to get board feedback and hear your wisdom and discussion.
Thank you, Vice President Kramer. I especially like your last slide, because as great as your research is, as good at work as your centers do, I always got to think about what's next. What's next? I think I asked the dean of the medical school that last month. You got to be looking ahead to what's next. And I'm also wondering what else you're wearing. You got a pin and you got a formal tie. Is there anything else on you?
I'm done with sartorial components of this presentation.
President Gable, I think you want to make some follow-up comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just brief comments. Thank you, Dr. Kramer. The thing I wanted to point out is essentially the same thing I said apropos to what the chair just mentioned right before Dr. Tolar presented last time, which is a reminder and a point of reflection that just because strategic planning is in process doesn't mean good work isn't happening in real time while the strategic planning happens. And what leaders of some of the pillars, themes, and of course commitments under the strategic plan are doing in real time is while they're continuing to do their good work that yields the results like you've seen here, they're also looking for how it aligns with the commitments that we intend to make. So that's exactly what both Dr. Tolar and now Dr. Kramer have done, and you'll start to see more of that as we continue to consult across the strategic planning presentations.
Well, let's go to questions and comments from Regents. First, the Regent from the 8th District, Representative McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Swigum, and thank you, Dr. Kramer, for what I'll also commend you for as a forward-looking, thoughtful and very connected with the strategic planning conversation that our president just did one topic ago. So I like the forward-looking nature of it. I like the use of stretch goals occasionally, but not overloading them. And I really like the fact that in most of those cases, you're tying to some metrics, and also though acknowledging where you don't know what the metrics will look like, but at least a metric-centric approach, and you're to be commended for all of that. And I just love the forward-looking nature of this, rather than a report as to what happened last year. This is what am I trying to drive in the next 2-3 years. So nicely done. Here's the question. I am very much intrigued by and encouraged by the systemness goal that you had, or the systemness perspective that you built into that. And I'm curious, what opportunities do you see that exist? Because you 2 slides before that, you had MnDrive. It seems to me that we hit home runs with our friends at the legislature when we demonstrate that we're solving challenges for all of Minnesota. Greater Minnesota presents an awful lot of those in that food, agriculture, water space, but I don't see natural resources in there. So I'm curious where you're thinking about MnDrive, and I'm curious, what roles, and maybe they fit underneath water when you think about minerals and trees and all that. But do you see an opportunity to build on the MnDrive successes of the past in that systemness context, and do you see some room for university research around the natural resources that have so enriched this university over the century?
I still have the taconite pellets you gave me.
Good. Vice President Kramer, timber and minerals.
Chair Swigum and Regent McMillan. So I would definitely say that natural resources is something we want to have special focus on, if only because probably one of my bullets on an earlier slide was the Natural Resources Research Institute in Duluth, which is a unique facility for R1 universities. Almost nobody has that kind of facility that can do the much more translational, much more applied research, to include their Coleraine facility, of course, which is basically a pilot plant that has significant technology related to mining, for example. So harvesting that to connect better. Actually, I've been trying to facilitate Rolf Wieberg, the director of that institute, coming down and chatting a bit more with leadership in our College of Science and Engineering to make sure that they're aware of what those resources are. I think that's really important. I guess I would probably have rolled it under the environment broad word that's used here on this last slide, but that's where I see the natural resources. I think it also, we are fortunate that we have congressional appropriators who are kind of interested in those areas, who have the ability to potentially have language put into funding bills that the university will be particularly able to compete for.
Thank you.
Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Vice President Kramer. I'm glad, I'm very pleased about setting goals. Goals drive behaviors. Numerical goals are really important around an institution like this, and setting a stretch goal is equally as important. I also resonate with this idea of a bigger project, and I'm thinking about Tolar's going to deliver some research out of the medical school and out of M Health Fairview. I'd like to see a big project come out of that relationship. And we've talked about the platform, the clinical platform that Fairview can bring to the table, well, that at the end of the day should show up in a research project. And I would hope that in the next 5 years, we can have a major project come through that relationship. Then finally, on MnDrive, the legislature loves money that has specific designations. That's whatever it's for whatever priorities you think make sense. That have Minnesota connections or that are just identifiable in general. So I hope that program can continue. We can decide to tweak it or not. But it has been, it's something that has worked well, and you're measuring it too, which I think is important. They want that as well, and we want that as well.
Great advice. I don't know if there was a specific question there or not.
May I respond, Chair Swigum?
No. Yes, go ahead, Chris.
Well, Chair Swigum and Regent Beeson, I would just say only because I know that if I don't respond, my colleague Dr. Tolar will hop over that desk back there.
He's getting up already.
He's jumping, isn't he? Indeed, the new joint healthcare enterprise offers significant opportunities for us now to be hosts for clinical trials, and our clinical translational research in CTSI is going to be an important component of that. So that money has already begun to go up. The medical school has done substantially well in research in the last 2-3 quarters. But coming to your MnDrive point, one possibility, and again, I just throw this out there because it's always dangerous to innovate, but the purchase of the Shriners Hospital and its intended purpose could arguably be viewed as an extension of the current brain MnDrive, right? It's focused on sort of behavioral components of health, and maybe that would be a way to pitch that and make it MnDrive Plus. It's a very early stage of discussion, but I think it would be a plausible way to go.
Regent Mayron.
Thank you again for your presentation. I, too, am very much taken by the last slide where you've got the strategic directions, and in particular that very last bullet having to do with engaging every undergraduate in the research experience. I think that Rochester, that's an example of one of our system campuses providing an incubator for best practices, and seeing your excitement about that and expanding the concept of perhaps requiring every undergrad to engage in one of the 3 pillars of our mission, which is research, I think is incredibly exciting. So I commend you on your thoughts on that.
Positive kudo for you there, Mr. Kramer. Regent Simonson from the 1st District.
Thank you, Chair Swigum. I too commend you and really appreciate what you're doing. We've had different conversations, and I think putting a strategic plan together like this is very important, and so I do commend you. I like the idea of, excuse me, blue sky research, and I call it discovery, I guess, phase 1 type, and the importance of that and moving that out. I have 3 basic questions, I guess, in different areas. You talk about undergrad in the research. I'm totally supportive of that, especially when they could maybe finish with a bachelor's degree and go out and get a job in some area like that. But some of my experiences here with the university are the research faculty themselves, and especially with regards to understanding commercialization and the opportunity for commercialization. So one of my questions is how does the Office of Technology and Commercialization, do they reach into these different programs? I've been at a meeting there and I've seen some presentations, but getting out to the different colleges and so on, do they really reach out rather than wait for the researcher to come to them?
Should I wait for the 3rd question, or?
Well, because they're in a different area.
Okay.
Mr. Kramer.
Chair Swigum and Regent Simonson, yes, and actually I would go above and beyond that. So absolutely, the individual technology licensing officers, those with different expertises within that operation TechCom, go out and evangelize to faculty meetings, to centers, for example. In addition to that, which is important work, we also have entities on campus that train people in entrepreneurship, if you will. And so there is a program that is sponsored by the National Science Foundation. It's called I-Corps, and I should remember what that acronym stands for, but basically it's entrepreneurial training. So helping faculty see how they might get a basic discovery to some sort of commercializable project. We also, for several years, have had something from NIH that's exactly the same. It was called the REACH program. In fact, we were one of only 4 institutions that got the first round of REACH funding, and we're now a partner with Mayo Clinic in a second round REACH proposal that I'm very optimistic will bring more along those lines. And finally, of course, the Carlson School does a fair amount in this space as well from a more pedagogical standpoint. So I do think that we do try hard to make faculty aware of the opportunities associated with that. There always will be some who frankly are just, that's not what they're here for. They really like the basic research, but we try very hard on that front.
And I assume that, excuse me, Chair, that's a fairly new initiative. It wasn't there a few years ago.
I-Corps probably goes back 7, 8 years at this stage, and REACH is probably about 5 years. So it certainly has not got a huge long history. We've paid much more attention to it. As, to be perfectly honest, as faculty have become much more entrepreneurial, the young ones, we hire assistant professors. It's not just that we can capture their interest. They came wanting to do that. And in fact, we also have, I'll just mention for completeness, an entrepreneurial leave program. So in addition to the usual sabbatical leave that's very typical at many institutions, there's a special leave you can take that doesn't count against your sabbatical leave that allows you to, for instance, work with a startup company of your own or go gain startup experience of some kind that will advance your own abilities.
Okay, good.
One more,
thank you.
Regent Jennison?
Good. I have some negative experiences there, so I'm glad to see what you're doing, as I said before. With regards to the Office of Technology and Commercialization, I'll call it an SOP or a policy on how you evaluate the technology. First of all, what's the status, R1, R3, that kind of thing? Do you have a policy that looks at that looks at the regulatory issues involved, that look at the market survey? You have a policy that is followed for each technology?
Dr. Kramer?
Chair Svigum, Regent Simonson, I will have to look to see if we have something written and called policy. There's a pretty robust weekly discussion of all the technology managers of the things that have come in that involves that kind of assessment and decisions about how to move forward, whether or not to move forward, whether to file, whether to release. But I would have to look for where we might have documentation on that process. And I will do that.
Sure.
Okay, kind of the last point, looking at University of Minnesota spin-offs over the last 10 years or so with regards to SBIR, STTR grants, it looks like about $33+ million that have come in. The role of the university, is that distributed? I understand, because I've been involved in that those funds have to be within the project, but they also can go to administrative costs and that kind of thing. Do we get a role in that? How does that work? And then the second part of that question is it moves with an SBIR, say from a phase 1 to a phase 2. If you get a phase 2 SBIR, does that affect how you talk about commercialization with that particular company?
Dr. Kramer?
Chair Svigum and Regent Simonson. So if a company has received SBIR or STTR funding, of course that funding does go directly to the company. Sometimes, by no means always, but sometimes that company is still using facilities of the university as an external user, as we make them available to any external user. And so we might see some of those funds coming that way. They may be doing genomics analysis at the Genomics Center, and they are charged what an external user is charged, which is substantially more than what we charge our internal users, to cover those sorts of overhead costs. I don't know that we have we don't do anything particularly special depending on the phase they're in. Mind you, if they are a University of Minnesota startup, there's a good chance that we have an equity investment in them. And of course, if they've reached phase 2 status, they're presumably growing their value significantly. So our fraction of that value is growing as well.
Okay, well, thank you. And with Regent Beeson, I think that target of growing by 40% over the next 5 years speaks well for what you're trying to do, and it'll speak well with the legislature, I think, too.
Regent Sue.
Thank you, Chair Swigum. Thank you, Vice President Kramer. This is a great report. I just have one question on the research gap. And you might be thinking, well, what research gap is he talking about? I'm talking about the research gap between us and Wisconsin. Just wondering if you could give us an update on that. Are we catching them? Are they growing as fast as we are, faster, slower, whatever? Thank you.
Dr. Kramer.
Chair Swigum, Regent Shu, it turns out I know the answer to that question. That gap is narrowing, and in fact, this last year, one analysis, and I forget the name of this particular analysis, there are obviously very many ways you rank schools, but in a ranking done by the Nature group of journals, which is well regarded, Minnesota rose a bit, and Wisconsin fell fairly precipitously. And that has to do with some of the things that have been happening within that institution's framework that we don't need to discuss here. But a journalist called me up to ask about it, and I expressed sympathy, as you might expect. But what did I hear about gleeful despair earlier in the meeting? So it's a stern chase, but I like our odds.
Regent Sue, follow-up?
Just a follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the rate that we're going, are we talking about catching them by the end of the next decade or sooner than that? Or what are we looking at?
I'd like, Chair Swigum and Regent Shu, I'd like to do the math on that before I select a particular number of years. I'm reluctant to say, but shouting distance is not too far away.
Okay, thank you.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really just wanted to see if you knew which district I represent. But real very quickly, I know we're at the end of our time here. I appreciate the determination and consistency with which Regent Simonson has pursued this topic. In particular, I also really greatly appreciate that you talk about the value of our institution as a form of education for students, and that this access to, I always kind of viewed it as participating in research. UROP, I recall when it was created, and it's, it just has gotten better over time by my estimation and evaluation, but it was a combination of having access to the faculty who were on the cutting edge, and then in some circumstances having the opportunity to participate in research as well. Obviously, when you have this many students, it's hard to have, it creates a burden for the researcher to try to have too many folks in the lab at the time, so to speak. One question I do have in that regard, because that type of educational access has been the way we have made the case to the legislature as to why it's more expensive to educate a student here than it is at other institutions that don't have that connection. What's the impact, and maybe we can, again, talk about it another time because we're out of time here, but when we move more to an instructor model for much of our teaching, as we've increased the number of people who are instructors, where it was a larger tenured faculty component at one point, on the one hand, I look at it and say, well, this sort of separates the students from those that are conducting the research. On the other hand, it also maybe lifts a bit of the burden. If there's one fewer class to teach for an individual faculty member, particularly if it's sort of a basic course or a rudimentary course, then that's an hour they can spend on the research. Has that had an impact? Does that have an impact? And where do we go from here?
Dr. Kramer.
Chair Swigum, Regent Rocha, that is a really deep question, to be honest. And I'm sitting here pondering whether I think I have a good answer to it. I think you have very properly recognized the sort of two extrema that could happen. One is that it in fact makes research faculty more productive, and hence they have a capacity to do more with the students. The other is that there's just fewer of them. In my experience in the College of Science and Engineering, which I know best, so I'm reluctant to answer this for the whole institution because now you're touching on a teaching issue as well. Our ability to hire what I would call contract faculty, term faculty, non-regular tenure track faculty, frankly advanced the productivity of the entire college because, well, they tended to be extraordinarily if they were teaching faculty, and so that was to the benefit of the students. It did indeed, ensure that research resources some technology, some infrastructure only can serve so many research faculty. And so from an investment standpoint, it was a good use of resources because it's less costly to hire, and I'm going to focus on teaching. There are research contract faculty as well, and they certainly engage postdocs, graduate students, undergraduates in their laboratories, and they're chosen for certain reasons. I think it's a subtle question, and it doesn't lend itself to an easy answer, but I think it can be optimized from unit to unit.
Thank you.
Dr. Kramer, thank you very, very much for your report. I see no further questions for you. If not, we'll let you leave the podium. We'll move on to committee business at this point, beginning with the report of the Mission Fulfillment Committee. Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair Swigum. The Mission Fulfillment Committee acted on one action item this month. The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the consent report, which includes the approval of changes to academic programs. I move approval of the consent report.
There's a motion before us to approve the Mission Fulfillment Consent Report.
Second.
Second, discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion at all? If not, those in favor of approving the Mission Fulfillment Committee's consent report, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Motion carries.
Thank you, Vice Chair Swigum. That concludes our report.
No additional business from there. Okay. Let's move on to the Regent McMillan. Share with us, if you will, the Finance and Operation Committee report.
Thank you, Chair Swigum. And we had 5 items this month that the committee acted on yesterday and that require board action today. We also considered and acted on a resolution to close a portion of the meeting, but did not have any actionable business out of that. The first of those 5 items is the committee's vote to unanimously recommend approval of a resolution related to the 2019 6-year capital plan, and I would move that approval of that resolution for the board now.
Okay. Second? Don't need one? Don't need one to a committee report?
I think we need one on a committee recommendation.
The second comes from the vote.
The fact that it's a 12-person committee.
On the committee report, we don't need the second. Okay, so we'll just move ahead. Before us is a motion of Regent McMillan regarding the 2020 capital request of the state. Any discussion? Is there any discussion at all? If not, those in favor of the capital request say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Motion prevails.
The second item is, sorry, I may have mixed that up, but we just acted on the 2019 6-year capital plan. This is now the 2020 state capital request. That's the second item we voted on, and the committee unanimously recommended adoption of that resolution, and I move it for the board's consideration now.
Okay.
2020 capital request.
2020 capital request, some $354 million. So, any discussion? Is there any discussion at all? If not, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? The motion does prevail.
Thank you, Regent Swigum. Item 3 is the committee's vote to unanimously recommend approval of the resolution related to the dining services contract extension, and I move that for board consideration now.
Okay, before us is the approval of the dining contract extension for up to 2 years, I believe. Any discussion? Any discussion at all? If not, we'll proceed to vote. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion does carry and it prevails.
Thank you. Item 4 is the committee's unanimous recommendation to approve the purchase of the 2025 East River Parkway property, also known as the Shriners Hospital, and I now move the committee's recommendation for full board consideration.
Is there any discussion at all to the purchase of the Shriners Hospital property? Any discussion of board members? If not, we'll proceed to vote. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion does prevail.
Thank you, Chair Swigum. Our last item yesterday was adoption, unanimous adoption of the consent report, which included Central Reserve's general contingency, purchase of goods and services of $1 million over, 2 capital budget amendments, 1 real estate transaction, and 1 schematic design. That was unanimously adopted again by the committee yesterday, and I now move it for board consideration.
Any discussion of the committee's consent report? Any discussion? If not, we'll proceed to vote. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
That concludes the report from the Finance and Operations Committee.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. You were busy. The report of the Audit and Compliance Committee, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Chair Swigum. In our meeting earlier today, the committee discussed 3 items, and I will give a brief description for those on the litigation committee who were not there. President Gable, Provost Hanson, and Senior Vice President Burnett provided the committee with an overview of the newly implemented enterprise risk review. The review builds on work done to define institutional risks previously done by the committee and will seek to establish an enterprise-wide process that would more consistently guide university leaders as they tackle and mitigate those risks. We also heard an update on establishing an ethics program within the university's Office of Institutional Compliance. The committee heard about progress that has been made to identify 4 to 5 values that would help guide ethical or values-based decision-making across the university. In our final item, Chief Auditor Klatt provided the committee with an internal audit update reporting that since June, 38% of recommendations rated as essential were implemented, slightly below the expected rate of 40%. 11 audit reports have been issued since June with 27 essential recommendations. I also note that we are coming up on the 90th anniversary of her office. And so there was a directive, I can't recall, was it you, Regent Swigum, that demanded cake? But we are very proud of the work they have done and look forward to that celebration. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much to the member from the 3rd District for the report of the committee. Thank you, Regent Rocha. Regent Beeson from the Litigation Review Committee.
Mr. Chair, the Litigation Review Committee met today, and at the meeting, we adopted a resolution authorizing the closing to discuss matters subject to attorney-client privilege. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Brings us to old business. Any old business to come before the board?
Do you wish a report from the Governance and Policy Committee?
No. I miss you. Regent Myron, I apologize. I missed you.
That's okay. That's all right.
From the 4th District, or are you at large? 5th.
I'm the 5th District.
Okay, go ahead.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
must have
You're
missed
welcome.
you.
The Governance and Policy Committee met today, October 11, 2009. It did not consider any action items this month. Thank you, Vice Chair Swigum. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Regent Myron. Thank you. Okay, let's go on to old business now then. I didn't miss anybody else. Okay, old business. Is there any old business to come before the board? Hearing none, is there any new business to come before the board? Hearing none, Regent Simonson, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The October meeting of the Board of Regents stands adjourned. Thank you.